TopMedTalk.
Well, hello and welcome to TopMedTalk. I'm Desiree Chappell, your host today, and I'm joined by my co-host, former editor-in-chief and founder of TopMedTalk, Monty Mythen.
Thank you for letting me back in, Desiree.
I did. I thought Mike Grocott can't make it today. Monty's around. He's available. I say former editor-in-chief.
Yeah, I left University College London, sadly. Been there a long time, by evolution. And joined Edwards Life Sciences in Southern California last August. Now I work for a biomedical engineering company.
Yeah, that's right. And we thought it still is okay for you to come back. We still...
I'm an emeritus at UCL,
Yes.
still an adjunct at Duke. And Edwards were keen for me to continue, so I stepped down as editor-in-chief because of potential conflicts of interest.
Yeah.
But therefore, I think we're managing this.
Yeah. So we're in Seattle, Washington. We're actually attending for the first time in a very long time for our own CME, and I had a poster presentation. We're attending the 2024 annual meeting of the IARS and SOCA, which tell us what the
International Anesthesia Research Society and the Society of Critical Care Anesthesiologists.
Yes, great organizations. It's a great meeting. We were here last year and we were able to actually be in the exhibit hall. This year, we decided let's go visit and attend some of the lectures and look at the posters and get out there.
It's a very special gathering.
Yeah.
Because it's a small meeting, but a very, very high-quality academic audience.
Yeah.
Scientific discussions in the broadest sense, going from the bench all the way through to later stage implementation science. But I just met 3 colleagues from UCL.
Oh, great.
Who were in a genetic/epigenetic/designing trial session.
Ooh, yeah, there's some good stuff out there. One of those hot topics in anesthesia is AI, artificial intelligence. I think about 80% of our conversations at ASA last year had some sort of AI that was brought up in that conversation. We got a lot out of that. But the story is moving along and how AI is being utilized and how it's kind of crept into the research base. So we thought that we would grab one of our presenters at the meeting, one of the presenters this year at the meeting who is new to TopMedTalk, Dr. Hannah Lonsdale, who is joining us from Vanderbilt University in Nashville. Hannah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me to talk to people on the podcast.
Yeah, so I was able to see some of your lectures over the course of the last couple of days and been so impressed with the work that you're doing. So before we dive into that, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your journey, because obviously you're not from Nashville. We can tell from your accent.
Northeast, I'd say.
Yeah.
From Nashville.
Yeah.
I'm from the British part of Nashville.
Yeah.
So I graduated from the University of Edinburgh Medical School many years ago now, in 2006, and did all of my anesthesia training in the UK. I worked as a consultant and attending at Sheffield Children's Hospital in the UK before getting the opportunity to take a sabbatical and come to the US for a year to start some research in AI. My intention was to go back to the UK and set up more of my own research, but I was seduced by the dark side of the pond. And the data environment here is so rich, I think partly as a result of the HITECH Act, which a number of years ago really spurred US medical centers to adopt electronic medical records. And so there is much more of a history, many more years of data available for my work and my research, which is in artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Oh, well, fantastic.
Let's pick on that, up on that for a second, Hannah. Because one of the discussions we often have on TopMedTalk is the USA is incredibly data rich, but in very many places it's information poor. So, Desiree, you quite often cite the fact that you work in places that have great electronic health records.
But it's very difficult to get information out of the system that helps drive.
Because I'm guessing, Hannah, that you went to places that were data rich and information rich, which there are many of them in the USA.
Yeah, to an extent. I think you allude to a point I make in a lot of my presentations, which is that the electronic medical record is designed to be used as a documentation and a clinical communication tool. It's a medico-legal tool. It's not a research tool. And so we have all that information in there. And even if you have the expertise to pull that data out, it's not organized in a way that makes research easy, and it's certainly not clean, and there's a lot of potential errors in there. It takes a lot of work, even if you have that skill set, to be able to prepare it to a point where it's useful for research. But yeah, there are certainly a limited number of clinicians, including and especially in anesthesiology, who have that skill set to be able to work with that data. And that's something that I feel really passionately about, is that we need to, with our new generation of medical students coming through and our residency programs, really get people data literate, because the use of AI tools is only going to increase from here. And even if you're not interested in doing that research and developing those tools, you're still going to have to know, when should I use these tools? Is this tool that somebody is trying to sell me or somebody is trying to get me to use the right one for the task? Is it actually going to help me make better decisions to help my patients?
That's interesting.
I assume you ended up at Vanderbilt because it's one of the places that has a reputation for being well ahead of the game in trying to enable exploiting data to answer questions.
Absolutely. Vanderbilt is a wonderful, rich data environment, both in terms of availability of data. They've had a highly developed electronic health record for a very long time, but also the infrastructure and the personnel are there. I work with a team called VAPOR, which is the Vanderbilt Anesthesia Perioperative Informatics and Research team. And that's a whole team of specialists in data analysis and data extraction and using that data both for operational and clinical purposes.
Wow, that's fantastic. Okay, I was going to ask you about artificial intelligence because, as I said, we've had lots of conversations on it. I always kind of say, what is your definition of AI? I mean, you are studying this is a part of your main research. So what would you define, AI? What is it?
It's a really good question. There isn't one standard definition that we use. Different organizations have their own definitions. And it also changes as we evolve, and things that were perhaps considered AI 10 or 20 years ago, like the automated EKG interpretation that tells you that a patient is having VT or asystole, which is sometimes right and sometimes not, may have once been considered AI, and now it's not really because our techniques have advanced so much. For me, it's when a computer uses data and generates predictions or information that would usually require human intelligence.
Yeah. Okay. So the pieces that you're looking at, what is specifically, your research?
I have up until now been looking at perioperative risk prediction. So that is taking a large amount of data around the perioperative period and how patients, the outcomes from patients, and trying to predict, for instance, mortality, risk of prolonged length of stay, risk of any kind of perioperative complications. But that's been pretty challenging because there's this problem called class imbalance, where if you take data from a whole bunch of patients, only a very few of them are going to have these rare outcomes that I'm really interested in. And unless you have a phenomenally large data set, the machine learning algorithms will not have enough information to be able to learn the patterns that these patients with the poor outcomes have. And so they won't be able to generate very good predictions. So I've tried to move away from those areas because getting the volume of data is going to require efforts like cross institutions, maybe even multi-country collaborations.
So we're not taking hundreds or thousands of patients, right? We're talking
hundreds of thousands
of patients.
Potentially. I mean, if you think about the risk of perioperative death from anesthesia, the risk is far less than like 0.1%. And so to figure out which patients, the traits of those patients to be able to predict the future, we need so many, like thousands and thousands of records to do that. And that's one of the big challenges for AI in anesthesiology and medicine on the whole at the moment, is that availability of data. Obviously, we need to protect patients' confidentiality, and data sharing across institutions is challenging and requires all sorts of agreements and security. And so it's getting that quality and volume of data is probably the biggest blocker to development of AI in anesthesiology right now.
Interesting.
So I'm going to mention Edwards now because they're relatively early mover in having something that's badged as AI in the space. The engineers there were working on waveforms. So within the waveform and a run of waveforms, it's not long until you end up with hundreds of millions of waveforms. And from that, you can get tens of millions of features.
Yep.
So they're in a sort of much better place to answer a question as opposed to does the patient have diabetes or not? Is that part of the challenge?
Yeah, so that's what's known as granularity of data. It's, although I might have data from 100,000 patients, if every data point is, does this patient have this condition less? Yes, no, that's not as detailed as a waveform or an image. And so we're seeing specialties like radiology just like taking off in AI right now because they have the hugely granular data that comes from these big imaging sources like scans, ultrasound, and to an extent anesthesiology can get there because we also have ultrasound and we also have waveform data. But again, getting those high volumes is a challenge for any one team to be able to collect.
You need the raw waveforms at a very high fidelity, collected in large volume, and you need to make sure that the acquisition of the waveform, so the damping of the arterial line or whatever it is also taken into account. Or it's back to junk in, junk out.
Absolutely. And most hospitals don't record that kind of information into their electronic health record, or even if they have a physiological data warehouse, which is something that we're seeing more and more hospitals have now, which records a more granular level of data. But even then, it's often on a 1 second by 1 second basis. And for waveform data, we're talking millisecond increments to really get that detail we need.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, if waveforms are even in Epic. And, you know, in Epic, there are other companies out there that I should say that they're in the EMR.
I don't think that the average Epic system is going to have it. I'm not aware of Epic recording that level of detail. I think for our anesthetic charts, it will record second by second heart rates, but it doesn't on the whole record any waveform data to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. So where are you? So, you know, you're struggling with this. Where are you headed, do you think, in your research now?
I've been thinking a lot about how I can use AI to directly help patients, which is really why I got into this game. When I first got out of my training, I just wanted to do regular anesthesia. I wanted to take care of kids. But then I got really inspired when I saw the amount of technology that we have even in our day-to-day lives. Like I have my cell phone in my pocket and it has access to all the data in the world, or the publicly available data in the world. And I really feel that medicine lags far behind the technology that we see in our homes. And I wanted to do my small part to try to bring some of that technology safely into medicine to help patients. So I'm really interested in how we can take the next steps with AI. At the moment, most of the work that's being done is we're developing models, but we're not doing the really tough work, which is actually implementing them into clinical practice. So I want to take a model that is developed and study how people respond to that, what it is that clinicians need to be able to trust the information that the model gives them, and how we can use that to influence our clinical decision making to improve our patient care.
Can you give us a tangible example of that? I mean, an example you might put into a grant proposal or something, not a research plan away. For me, I think that the clinical world is not quite ready for AI decision making or AI decision support in direct patient care. So I've started to look more along the kind of, I call it like the paraclinical thing. So prediction of length of stay and estimated date of discharge. That is perhaps a way that we can
really help to get patients better care by avoiding delayed discharges or giving better information to patients about how long they might be and how long the hospital stay might be. But it's not as threatening as this AI is telling me to push epi now. And I think that's a way that we can start to appreciate the power of AI without it feeling quite so threatening to our clinical care.
Yeah. Well, like you said, we're all using it every day in our everyday life.
Yeah. We don't necessarily translate that into our clinic. We're much more cautious in our clinical practice than we are with whether we turn left or right to get to.
Which is okay. I heard during your presentation you were talking about bias, the different types of biases that may be within the data sets that we have. And I mean, that is a real concern, correct?
Absolutely. So the data that we use to train our AI models is the day-to-day practice of clinicians. And we know that there is plenty of data out there that people from minoritized groups do not have as good a healthcare outcome. They are treated differently by the system. And so if we're taking data collected from that system and using it to train our AI models, the models will not add any bias, but they're learning that bias. There's some very famous examples from outside of medicine where they attempted to train AI to estimate like a length of a sentence for somebody who'd been convicted of a crime, or to predict the likelihood of somebody recommitting a crime once they were paroled. And those early algorithms were biased against certain racial groups. And we need to be really conscious of that when we're building our models. We can't eliminate, or I'm not aware of any ways to eliminate that bias from our data, but we definitely need to be very conscious that the outputs of our models are not biased and take steps to mitigate that bias during the training and the model development process.
It's a fair point. I think, I mean, there are companies I had a technology session at the World Congress of Anesthesiologists this past year in Singapore and asked that question to a lot of the leaders. And I mean, it's all on everyone's radar, trying to, make sure that this is something that things are developed that's always being thought of. The last thing that I want to touch on before we end, you gave a presentation on generative AI. And why don't you tell us just a little bit more about that and how we're seeing that play into the world of anesthesia and potentially research as well?
Yeah. So generative AI, as a very basic definition, is AI that creates new content. So the most famous examples are the large language models like ChatGPT, Claude, there's another one called Llama, and then the diffusion models which create images, the most famous of which is DALL-E. Yeah. And there's all kinds of potential clinical applications from these that we're really only scratching the surface of, but they're already starting to be used for things like reading through volumes of patient notes and summarizing prior to a patient presenting for anesthesia. There's some work being done on perioperative risk prediction and also generating an ASA physiological status score. Generative AI has been shown to be almost as good at
That's right, you gave that example.
Although anesthesiologists don't always agree on the ASA score between themselves.
Yeah, that's very true. And in the world of research, it's coming into play and for good and bad, right?
Yeah, so I've started using a generative AI for some of my work, not to have it produce a ready to submit manuscript. It's not there yet, but to use it as a drafting tool. So I could make a set of notes and say, can you produce a first draft of this document? I've used it for producing minutes from a meeting, and you can also use it for things like summarizing journal articles. There was a really interesting presentation just now on using it for education and professional development. People are even starting to use it to write their letters of recommendation for promotion. It's already almost everywhere. I asked during my presentation this morning for the audience to raise their hand if they used generative AI, and more than 50% probably 75% of the audience raised their hand. It's happening. So I think it's really important that we figure out how to use it safely and ethically, both in research, where you have to say if you have used AI as part of your paper writing or your grant writing, but also if we're going to use it for clinical purposes, we really need to check that it's producing accurate information that's suitable for what we're doing.
Yeah.
As a diagnostic aid, I'm just thinking back to some of when I'm working on adult intensive care in central London. The occasional case over the years, no matter how hard people had scratched their heads, they weren't thinking of polonium poisoning, beta radiation.
Absolutely.
Whereas actually, if someone could do that history at that level, someone would turn around and say, well, have you thought about this, and have you thought about that, and have you thought about the other? Because all the information was there.
There has been a study, one of the very early studies using generative AI on those clinical conundrums that you see in some medical journals.
Don't make a diagnosis, to just say, have you thought about, have you thought about porphyria?
And the AI generated a differential diagnosis list that included the weird and wonderful things you see in the challenging clinical cases that you get in the back of journals in more than 50% of cases. So it's definitely a useful tool.
Yeah,
we got
that, but I think we could have got there with. I'm just thinking of the sort of list of ones over the
years. Yeah,
we got a pretty big, clever, multifaceted team. But maybe we've got there a couple of days earlier.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think as a suggestions, it's great. We definitely should not be using it in place of clinical judgment. I think it's a great assistant right now, but it's not something that we can rely on 100% instead of our clinical acumen.
Yeah. Hannah, well, thank you so much for sitting down with us. This is great fun.
Thank you so much. It's been really good to chat. It's been a wonderful meeting.
Yeah, it has. All right, great. And it's a continuation of this conversation about AI, which I'm sure will go on and on for a long time now. But I think it was some good information shared with us. So thank you so much.
Have you been back to the UK to present recently?
No, I haven't.
There we
It's
go.
been a little while.
Everyone who's listening, Hannah's an excellent presenter about AI in his space.
That's right. I've been listening, especially over in the UK. Wherever you are in the world, if you need someone to talk to you about AI, Hannah is all right. Yeah, reach out to us. We'll get your contact information. And thank you for listening to TopMedTalk. You can always find us at TopMedTalk.com on your favorite podcatcher. We are on social, X, which formerly known as Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. We're journeying into the world of YouTube. So if you found us there, be sure to subscribe, give us a thumbs up. Every little bit helps on that. And thank you so much again for listening to TopMedTalk. Cheers, everybody.
TopMedTalk.
Thanks for downloading TopMedTalk. Don't forget to subscribe. Check us out on YouTube and, of course, on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and X. Also, it's important to remember that TopMedTalk is the broadcasting arm of EPPOM, evidence-based perioperative medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that, and the way to do that is eppom.org. Check out our website and find out about some of the incredible conferences we're going to be arranging across the year. eppom.org.